Dr. Anil Kakodkar is here. Sir, can you switch on your video now? So I want to
Yeah,
introduce you quickly.
just
Just give
1
me,
minute.
yeah,
Just a
sure,
minute.
sure, sir, sure. Take your time. Yeah, we can see you. Just give me 2 minutes to
You can
introduce you. Just give me 2 minutes to introduce you. I'm just introducing you,
just,
though everybody knows you. They probably had lesson on you in the school curriculum, and they are very excited.
I see.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Just a minute.
I just a minute. I'm not able to see myself.
Yeah.
So, so
Very
let
clear, sir.
me.
Just try. We can see you. It's okay now, sir? You can hear me?
Not yet. Just a minute.
Yeah. Yes, sir. We'll wait. Students can see Kakodkar, sir?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes. We all can see
Ah,
you, sir.
yeah, but I must see myself also. So just,
Yeah. Please, sir, take
just
your
a
time.
minute.
Just 10 o'clock. Aram se. Take your time. Marushka, you can hear, right?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Sir, can you see yourself now? We can see you.
No, I can't. But let's carry on.
Yeah,
I think
we will start. So
I
meanwhile, what
don't.
I'll do is
I don't
I
have
will, in fact, it's very, my dear friends, it's Dr. Kakodkar sir was with us. He had a live interaction with our students 6 months ago, and it was a very nice interaction, very memorable one. Fine. So what I'll do is it's very difficult to introduce him. The biodata runs into several pages, but I have picked up few things which should really motivate you just to listen to this. Fine. So I go ahead. Dr. Anil Kakodkar is son of a soil. He hails from Goa, but he never studied in Goa, always studied outside. He did his BE Mechanical Engineering from prestigious Victoria Jubilee Technical Institute in Mumbai, which is very famous, is as good as IIT those days. Then after that, he immediately joined BARC, Baba Atomic Research Center. And as he was working in BARC, he did his MS, Master of Science in Experimental Stress Analysis from University of Nottingham in United Kingdom. After that, he continued with BARC doing research and played a very key role in designing and construction of famous Dhruv reactor, a completely original, indigenous and high-tech project. He was a part of the core team of architects of India's peaceful nuclear tests in 1974 and also in 1998. Further, he led indigenous development in India's pressurized heavy water reactor technology. He also worked in the rehabilitation of 2 reactors at Kalapakkam and the first unit at another place which at one stage were on the verge of being closed down or written off. In 1996, he became the director of famous Bhabha Atomic Research Center, and since 2000, he's leading the Atomic Energy Commission, prestigious Atomic Energy Commission of India, and also is the secretary of the Department of Atomic Energy. He has over 250 publications in international journals and conferences to his credit. He was he has won several awards, including Padma Vibhushan. That speaks for itself. You just say Padma Vibhushan and everything is clear. It's a very high level civilian award, and Maharashtra Bhushan Award. And few years back, he also got Gomanta Vibhushan Award. And most importantly, famous Homi Bhabha Lifetime Achievement Award. Dr. Kakodkar is a member of many prestigious boards, commissions, organizations, including he served as a chairman of Board of Governors of my IIT Bombay from 2006 to 2015, such a long period. So I can in fact go on and on, but maybe as he speaks, I will say a few more things. But Dr. Kakodkar, welcome, and please enlighten us with your knowledge. So maybe, sir, you can start with how design of reactors is so challenging and what are the factors involved. So please welcome,
Yes.
Dr. Kakodkar.
Well, first of all, thank you, Mr. Venkatesh Prabhu Desai and everybody else who is present there. And of course, my dear young students. It's always a pleasure to interact with students. And so I'm very happy to join all of you today. And as was mentioned, I did come there some time back and I still remember that interaction. That
Thank you,
probably
sir.
was a different group. Was it right?
Yes. No, sir, different group. These people have
It
not
was
heard you at all.
yeah, that was a different group. So, but for me, it was a very invigorating experience.
Very nice of you.
Well, let me tell a bit about myself. As Shri Prabhu Desai mentioned, I studied in VJTI. I did mechanical engineering because at that time uh, the top priority of students was to do mechanical
Yes, sir.
engineering,
Yes.
and so we all have this herd mentality. So all colleagues, fellow students are doing mechanical engineering. So you also want to do mechanical engineering. So I also did. By the time it came to completing the course in VJTI, that was the time I started thinking, what do I do after completing mechanical engineering? And because in those days, India was not as advanced technologically as we are today. And
True.
so the engineers, mechanical engineers, they would usually get into things like production. In fact, production engineering was also a new term in those days. It was being called industrial engineering. Or you would get into marketing, or some such activities which were mostly repetitive.
Right.
And that is the time I realized that I would never be happy in getting into a repetitive job, regardless of the salary it offers.
Correct.
In fact, in those days, engineers particularly were in great demand, and we used to get letters from industries saying that we have come to know that you have appeared for the final year and your result is likely to come out soon. And if you are interested in our company, then here is a form attached. You please fill in the form and send it to us, and we'll organize your interview. So it was, rather than you're going and seeking the job with companies used to seek. And
Yes.
and it's not even like campus interviews. Campus interviews, at least they come and select. Here, I think our batch was not very large. And the number of letters each one of us, I'm not talking about myself, each one of us had received were probably much more than the number of students in the class. So it was clear that all of us would get a job. There was no issue of that kind. But as I said, it was clear to me that is not what going to make me happy because of the repetitive nature of those activities. I didn't know what research means in those days, but somebody told me that in BARC there is research going on in atomic energy, and there is a lot of new development of nuclear power reactors and so on. And it sort of dawned on me that, look, I will get a chance here to do something new, something different every day, and I will be free from the drudgery of repetitive jobs. And that's how I ended up in BARC. In fact, BARC training school, where there is a 1-year orientation program, because you don't learn anything about reactors, reactor physics, nuclear physics, and all in
Yes, sir.
in engineering colleges.
Yeah.
So this orientation program is a very heavy program, but that is where I started developing interest about new
So how
things.
long
And
was
then
the program, sir? How long was the program?
this is a 1-year program.
1 year. Okay.
1-year program. So 1-year orientation program, and it's sort of. But those subjects I found very interesting, primarily because I knew that I'm going to apply whatever I learned in this training. I'm going to apply it pretty soon, and after that, of course, there was no sort of looking back. So the short point that I wish to make is I think a time comes in everybody's life when you kind of recognize that this is the launching pad. This is your time to make good career decisions. Work very hard for going forward, and if that is consistent with your aptitude, what you want
Yes.
to do, then I can almost assure you that success is more or less guaranteed.
Fantastic.
So now it's not necessarily that you should do engineering or medicine or humanities. I think you can go to the top in any discipline provided you like that, provided you get interested in it,
Yes.
provided you start deriving a lot of joy in terms of studying those subjects and also applying those subjects. And so my suggestion to all our young colleagues is that I think you should give expression to your aptitude. You should give expression to what you think you like. And it may so happen that after some years, you may find that, no, that is not what I like. Now, but I think even then, because, many times it so happens that it takes some time for you to figure out what you like.
Yes.
But that doesn't matter, because you should kind of follow your inner calling. And of course, in India, changing tracks is not very easy, but it's becoming possible. And of course, abroad, this is quite easy. And there are people, even Nobel laureates, who do undergraduate in one subject or whatever set of subjects, postgraduate in something else, PhD in some third thing.
Yes.
And this is actually a good thing.
Yeah.
So, and I know there are restrictions under Indian conditions at the moment, but people are recognizing that, and this is changing slowly. But I think this importance of pursuing what you like is very important. And I think we should pursue what careers, what we like, and make sure that out of what you decide to do, there should be some benefit to the society around. They should benefit from what you do. Now, there are, of course, pure areas of scholarship where you want to go deep in a particular subject. And that, of course, is important, because frontiers of knowledge have to be expanded, and they expand like this: scholars going deep into the subject, people getting into research in different disciplines, and that is, of course, very important. But whenever you expand the frontiers of knowledge, there is it opens up possibilities for applying that knowledge for the benefit of society, for the benefit of people around. And that should not be ignored. That benefit of whatever knowledge you have created, contributed, the benefit must be made available to people. And I think we all should work, again, depending on our aptitude, the proportion of how much I want to work purely knowledge for knowledge sake, and how much I want to work for, knowledge for application sake, is an individual choice. But it cannot be the case that knowledge has been evolved and society, even if there is a possibility of benefit, is deprived of that benefit, because that will not be right. So I think let me stop here. Wish all of you great success in your careers. I know you are all 11th standard students, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So as 11th standard students, I know you must be right now very tense. Next year is 12th. And so there are kind of, very competitive environment which you must compete and come to the top, because that's the route to moving forward.
Yeah.
So let me wish you all success in your immediate studies, that is the 11th and 12th standard, and then wish you a great success ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. So what we will do is now, before we'll take a questions, we've got 45 minutes, right, sir?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So now students have a lot of questions they have sent me. There's many questions I'm sure will evolve also. But before we
Yeah,
come to students' questions, I just want to create
yeah.
little background. They may not have, not everybody will have the background. So can you just
Uh,
tell us whether fission and fusion, which is more efficient to produce atomic energy? Can you throw some light using in slightly easier terms?
yeah, okay. See, let me start from energy per se. I'll come to fusion and
Yeah.
fission in a moment.
Yes.
But energy is very important for, human development, I would say,
Yes.
because right from time immemorial, uh, humans learn that if you create fire, then you can cook, and that food becomes more easily palatable or digestible. Uh, Even for cultivation, he found that humans require energy. So initially everything was manual, but slowly wheel was invented, and slowly different agricultural implements were invented. And as humans started doing more work to improve their food supply, to improve their other amenities, the housing, the clothing, and then later on transportation, lighting, and so on, communication, if you come even later. Now, all these things require energy, and unless you have adequate access to energy, many of these things you would find you'll get terribly constrained. Imagine that, we're all used to electricity, and imagine that just like in the lockdown is there, somebody says in lockdown, okay, next 1 week, no electricity. And you can imagine the plight we'll all be put through.
Yes, sir.
So energy is very important. And in fact, the Human Development Index, which is a measure developed by United Nations for judging the quality of life of people in a society or in a country.
Yeah.
There is a strong correlation between energy use and the quality of life, or Human Development Index.
True.
And it goes up to a point that you get access to more energy, your Human Development Index keeps going higher. Of course, beyond a particular level, even if you increase your energy use, it doesn't make any difference, because you already reached the highest level possible of Human Development Index. Now, there is a large part of the world which is still far away from that level of energy use, which will guarantee the highest level of Human Development Index. And India certainly is one such country, a large country that too, where we have a lot of progress to make in terms of developing or enhancing our Human Development Index. And so we require a lot of energy to do that. Now, on the other side, you require energy sources. For example, if there is a water reservoir at a higher elevation, then that water coming to lower elevation, it gains kinetic energy, starts flowing at very high speed, and you can run turbines with that water and generate energy. Or you can burn coal, or you can burn wood, or you can burn oil or gas or whatever, and with that generate heat, use that heat to generate steam from water, and then that steam at high pressure, if you expand, then it gets into high velocity, and that can run steam turbines now, and you can generate electricity. Now, first source, water falling from a height, you can say it's more a kind of potential energy
Yes.
converted to kinetic energy. And so you are talking about large quantity of water in the process, because it's a kilogram of water falling from a height of 1 meter or whatever corresponds to a certain amount of energy. Now, in case of heat, for example, if I burn 1 kilogram of coal, I generate certain amount of heat, so I can evaporate a certain amount of water, and I can get certain amount of electricity. Now, 1 kilogram of water coming down from 1 meter, compared to that 1 kilogram of coal burning would produce much more energy, because that is chemical energy. Chemical energy is associated with the electrons orbiting the nucleus of an atom, or even a molecule for that matter. Now, these resources, of course, these are all Earth resources. Our energy requirements are large. So progressively, we will find that availability of these resources would be in question. And more importantly, particularly when you talk about use of fossil fuel, then not only that availability goes in question, but also the carbon dioxide that results as a part of burning carbon is a greenhouse gas. It creates a kind of a greenhouse effect around our Earth, and that kind of traps the heat, and that disturbs the balance. You get heat from the sun, so some of it is absorbed, some of it is radiated back. Now, if you trap that heat which is radiated back, then obviously there is more heat available on Earth, and that leads to warming. And that is creating a huge threat about climate change. It was bad all the time, but at that time, when the total carbon dioxide emission was not large, we were not feeling that effect. But now, progressively, we are seeing those effects, and the scientists who have carried out modeling of these phenomena, they have come to the conclusion that now there is not too much of time left. Once we reach something like 1.5 degrees temperature rise above the pre-industrial level, then we would have serious kind of climate issues in terms of severe phenomena, in terms of ice melting leading to seawater rise, in terms of erratic seasons, and so on and so forth. And it's going to affect a large number of people. In fact, we are going through this pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, and we have seen the global impact of this pandemic. The impact of climate change will be several orders of magnitude higher than what we are seeing. And so nobody wants to get into that. But everybody says, okay, but I have immediate requirement. You do the thing. Just like, pandemic, the physical distancing requirements, not everybody follows, because they say that I'm okay, the other people should do all this. So that's the human psychology. But the fact is that we have to find a solution. And to me, an important solution is to use for energy sources which does not lead to carbon dioxide emission, and also find technologies which can actually make use of carbon dioxide in atmosphere and put it to use, remove that carbon dioxide from atmosphere and put it to some use, in which case we can decarbonize this whole energy activity. And there are many ways of doing that. Renewable energy is certainly one, but renewable energy is variable energy, it's not available all the time. And you can stabilize it by storage, but then there are costs. Whereas nuclear energy, which the question that was asked, nuclear energy does not emit carbon dioxide, and the nuclear reactors run 24/7. In fact, some of our reactors have been running for 3 years, 3.5 years continuously. So, and you require that kind of power sources. And in terms of, it's called baseload generation in power generation terminology. Now, nuclear is the only option where you can generate baseload electricity, which is very important. Now, today we know how to get nuclear energy out of nuclear fission, where an atom of fissile atom, uranium-235, which is available in nature, but there are other fissile atoms which we can make artificially. And if you carry out fission, you generate energy. And of course, now compared to chemical energy, which was the process associated with electrons surrounding the nucleus, here we are talking about rearrangement of the particles within the nucleus. There are rearrangement of proton and neutrons. And that leads to much larger energy. So a kilogram of uranium-235 fissioning would produce maybe millions and millions times the energy that a kilogram of coal would produce. And so we can produce a lot of energy with very little utilization of earth resource, and you will get energy which is very clean. Now, nuclear fusion is also nuclear energy, and you may not have studied binding energy, have you? They may not have studied.
I think 12th standard, sir. 12th standard they studied.
12th standard. So anyway, I'll not use that term. So, there are different types of nuclear reactions. What I told you, nuclear fission is a nuclear reaction where a fissile atom like uranium-235, when it interacts with a neutron, that atom splits into two parts. And that split parts are called fission products, fission fragments. And these fission fragments, after fission process, they move at very large velocity. And since they are inside a matter, this velocity, particles moving with very high velocity inside nuclear fuel. And obviously there is a resistance to that movement. So it is stopped. And when you stop something moving at very high speed, it generates heat.
I see.
And that is how nuclear fuel becomes hot. And then you can remove that heat and produce steam. Now, there's another kind of nuclear reaction where the lighter nuclei, for example, hydrogen, or there are also isotopes of hydrogen called deuterium and tritium. So, hydrogen nucleus has just one proton. But imagine that if you have one proton and one neutron in the nucleus, so it will still be, its chemical characteristics will be still like hydrogen, because it has one proton, so it will have one electron surrounding that. So chemically, it looks very similar to hydrogen. Or if you make water out of this new material, which is called deuterium now, if you make water out of that, so it is called heavy water. Now, similarly, if you add one more neutron to the nucleus, so you have one proton and two neutrons, and surrounding that you have one electron. So it is also like hydrogen, but it has now three particles in its nucleus, one proton and two neutrons. So it is called titron or tritium. And this tritium, if you convert to water, it is, H2O. Deuterium converted to water becomes D2O, and tritium converted to water becomes T2O, but they are all like water. Now, deuterium and tritium, they are, it's possible that at high temperatures, when they are moving, the nucleus is moving at a very high speed, then, and that temperature I'm talking about is of the order of 1,000,000 degrees Celsius. Then they can fuse together. And when they fuse together, again, you get lot of energy that gets liberated. And so similarly, that you get heat and then you can generate steam out of that. So that is now fusion energy.
Hmm.
Now, in terms of fission, you know how to control fission. So you can use fission to make a nuclear bomb, but you can also, by controlling it, use it for power generation purposes.
Right.
In case of fusion, you know the fusion reaction, you also know how to use it as an explosive fusion bomb. But the technological development for controlled fusion energy release is still in progress. People are working on that. There is a major experiment at ITER in France,
There was a
International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, where India also is a equal partner, equal participant to that development. And we do hope that after some time, we would be able to build reactors where you can get electricity out of fusion reactor. And once that happens, then of course we get access to even larger amount of energy. So that's broadly the energy.
So, sir,
energy
right now, if
picture.
I understand it correctly, it is mainly through fission in India, right?
Not only India, all over the world.
Everywhere. I see,
All the
I see.
electricity is generated essentially through fission.
Okay.
While development work is going on to get electricity out of fusion.
I see, sir. So very well answered. You are an excellent chemistry teacher also. So the questions are pouring in. So we'll have
Yeah.
to really run through the questions. There are so many. Please stop. Please stop. So first question, Anish Phad can ask. Please come on screen so that sir can see you. And please ask your question. Anish Phad. Now stop messaging. I'll give you a chance. Anish Phad, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
No, he's
Yeah, Anish, please
he's
come in. Please ask your question to sir.
Okay, sir. So my question
Anish, can you put your video also on so that I can see you?
Please, Anish, put your video on. This is Anish. Ask your question.
So my question is that India has one of the largest deposits or reserves of thorium metal.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
yes.
But it is still not used in nuclear reactors. So
you're talking about thorium.
Yes, sir, the metal. But it is still not used in nuclear reactors. Why is it so?
A very important question. See, I told you that I talked about fission of uranium-235, right? Now,
Yes,
uranium-235 is the only fissionable isotope that is available in nature. And then I also said that while you can convert other materials to other fissionable isotopes. Now, thorium, we have thorium in plenty in our country, but thorium by itself is not fissionable. You cannot fission thorium just like that. But you can convert thorium into fissionable material. For example, if you put thorium in a nuclear reactor or wherever you have plenty of neutrons, then that neutron will interact with thorium, and then of course there are two decay processes, but following those two processes, this thorium that mass is 232, that would get converted to uranium-233. Mind you, what is available in nature is uranium-235, whereas what will come out of thorium is uranium-233. Now, uranium-233 is also fissionable, but now you want to build a nuclear power plant, then you require this material on large quantities. And you must set up some initial reactors to be able to convert thorium to uranium-233. And so you have to start with uranium reactors. And that is what we are doing currently. And we have a 3-stage nuclear power program where in the 3rd stage, when we would have sufficient amount of fissile material, then we would convert lot of thorium into uranium-233, and then we will set up power reactors where we will get energy from uranium-233, which in turn would mean you are getting energy from thorium. So
Yes,
that is the plan. Now, while we are not there yet in terms of large scale use of thorium, but on laboratory scale, on experimental scale, we have done this. For example, at Kalpakam, we have a small reactor. Its name is Kamini, Kalpakam mini pool reactor. Now, that reactor consists of only uranium-233, which has been derived from thorium, the way I described. So, but that's a small reactor. So it's okay for small experiments and things like that, but it cannot be used for power production. So we are technologically, we are making a lot of progress, but it will take time for making use of thorium for large scale power production.
So are we importing the raw material right now? No, it's all ours only, right?
Well, thorium, there is no question of import because as Anish said, we have plenty of thorium.
Fine.
Now,
Good.
we have modest
Uranium.
quantities of uranium.
Huh.
So we have kind of carried out and developed our program using those modest quantities, and we build now commercial power reactors running on uranium, which is produced in our country.
I see.
But our requirement is large, so we are wanting to expand, and for that we are importing uranium in addition to what we can produce in the country.
So very well answered. There are many people waiting. So we go to Sridevi Patil. Sridevi Patil,
So,
can you hear us?
Anish, I suggest you now switch off your video.
Correct.
And
Correct.
also mute your mic.
Yes.
And then whosoever is the next questioner,
yes,
he or she should
Sridevi
unmute
Patil
and switch on the video.
Yes, sir. Sridevi Patil,
Yes, sir.
please come.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So, sir, my question was, there are many drawbacks of nuclear energy, like the Chernobyl incident and the dropping of the atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, so is it okay for the development of nuclear energy, even after all is it worth the risks of developing nuclear energy further?
Well, there are two parts to your question. What happened in Hiroshima, Nagasaki was clearly very bad. And we should all work for elimination of nuclear weapons, complete total nuclear disarmament. But again, as I told you, just like climate change issue or even our pandemic issue, everybody will put self before the needs of other people. And that is true for individuals, that is also true for countries. So there are some countries, the 5 weapon states recognized under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So they said that, okay, we 5 will have nuclear weapons and rest of the world will not have any nuclear weapons. And now the question is, so that would mean that it becomes necessary for you to become subordinate to one of them. And out of these 5, the 2 real big were at that time United States and Russia. Now China is emerging. But India particularly, we felt that this is unfair, that only some people will secure their country by possessing nuclear weapons and expect the other peoples to be their kind of, subordinate nations to get their security. Because we want to sort of decide our own destiny. So we don't want to be covered or conditioned by anybody or dictated by anybody. So India said, no, we are not going to join any club. We want to be completely autonomous in making our decision. We will chart our destiny. and this NPT is discriminatory. So we didn't sign that. Now, expectation was that as was embedded in NPT, the world will move towards disarmament. But that did not happen. On the other hand, there was an arms race, and these countries have accumulated thousands and tens of thousands of nuclear weapons. Not only that, this treaty, earlier it was supposed to be, for some period. Now it has become permanent. So they have divided the world in an asymmetric world. Now, India, see, one advantage is you want to dictate or decide your own destiny. But at the same time, the world is what it is. So we have two neighbors. Both of them possess nuclear weapons. China possessed even earlier. And we knew by the time India came out in open in terms of as weapon status, that Pakistan also has nuclear weapons. And both these countries are not very, very friendly towards us. And we know currently also, what we are going through. So it became necessary for India to secure or ensure its security. So India decided to use, develop that technology, use its capability to develop nuclear weapons. And we came out as a nuclear weapon power. But that doesn't mean we are still champions of nuclear disarmament. Now, why I said this long introduction is this part of nuclear weapon part is certainly bad, and there is no justification of that. And so what happened in Hiroshima, Nagasaki is not justifiable at all. Okay. Now, that need not be confused by use of nuclear energy for electricity production purposes. Because nuclear bomb and nuclear power reactor, they are two different things. You cannot get electricity out of a nuclear bomb, and nuclear power reactor cannot be made to explode. The two designs are completely different things. So I think we should not mix up these two. Now, even coming to power reactors, there are issues. For example, you mentioned Chernobyl happened, and Chernobyl people were subjected to radiation, a lot of evacuation and things like that. Now, there, recognize that, we have all this fear syndrome. For example, even in this corona, there is a fear syndrome seems to be working very hard. Initially we'll all say, because, everybody is afraid that people will not take proper precautions and there could be community transmission. So we had lockdown. Now it was affecting our economy. So they said, no, we should unlock it. Now, because otherwise we will control corona, but we'll have nothing to eat. So we'll anyway die.
True.
So, these are contradictions in life. Now, so Chernobyl, for example, because of those images of Hiroshima are kind of heavy in the minds of people. Moment there was an accident in Chernobyl, there was a lot of exodus, and if people were evacuated to so-called safe places and all. And there was movement of lakhs of people. Now that creates a trauma in the minds of public. Now, teams of medical doctors, international teams, not biased by one country or other, they have gone through and studied the medical effects on people following Chernobyl accident, and they have done that after 10 years after Chernobyl, and they have repeated that again after 20 years. And in fact, there are reports available, and if you read those reports, they say that the so-called psychosomatic effects, you displace people, take them away from the place they were living, you tell them you don't eat that, like that, in current pandemic also we get all instruction, do this, do that, you don't like that. Now there have been, right now also, people are being confined to their houses. And there are psychological effects, a lot of counseling taking place now to make sure that, psychologically we are at peace. So same thing happened, and those psychosomatic effects and the damage caused by them was actually much higher than the damage caused by radiation in Chernobyl accident. So the short point I'm making is that nuclear energy, because first time we came to know about it in a very wrong manner in Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and then we sort of experienced this. So we don't know what is the harm. So anything little, you utter a word of radiation and we say, no, I'll get cancer. We have in Kerala monazite sands on the beach. And so there is a higher natural radiation background. It can be the beaches in Kerala may have radiation level, natural radiation level, which may be order of magnitude more than beaches of Goa, for example, or for that matter in Mumbai city. Now, there also people are living for generations. So we actually conducted a study as to supposing these are people who are living in 10 times or 20 times higher radiation generation after generation. What is the effect? And we found there is no effect on them.
I see.
But so the point is there is more unnecessary fear because of this. Now, that does not mean that we should not take care. We should take precautions. There is radiation protection is a very controlled subject. But if you now Google, in this, I have given you this background. So you simply Google and ask a question, fatalities per kilowatt hour generated by different sources of energy production.
Okay.
And you will be surprised that the fatalities out of nuclear are the least, including after accounting for Chernobyl, what you said. And Fukushima is, there was no fatality at all whatsoever. In fact, there was no major health effect as well. So the point is, I am not justifying accident. I'm not justifying Chernobyl. And the nuclear community has learned lessons out of it. I myself spent 3 years studying Chernobyl accident and see how we should improve nuclear technology to make sure that doesn't happen again. So today's reactors are much safer than they existed earlier. Now that still does not mean that an accident will not take place. See, take case of air travel.
Yeah.
Earlier, if I had to travel from Bombay to Goa, I will book my ticket and immediately go to the next counter, which used to be there in the airport itself, air insurance. So quite apart from the air insurance which airline takes, I would take my own additional air insurance. And because, the fear was there that, what if there is an accident? Not that accidents do not take place now, but they are so few.
Yes.
And we travel, if I want to go to Goa, I'll just book the ticket and arrive there tomorrow morning, provided the pandemic restrictions allow me to do that, right? So nuclear technology also is like that, but on a larger scale.
Yeah.
But the benefits of nuclear are far, far larger. So I think the important thing is, number one, don't confuse nuclear weapons with nuclear energy. Nuclear power technology is much safer today than it was earlier, and that effort continues. And secondly, today it is the safest form of energy generation.
Yes.
And you can check this on Google whenever you like.
Yeah.
Okay.
So one related question is asked by some 7 or 8 people. So I just combined 3 questions into one. So maybe you can answer that quickly.
Yeah.
Still so many questions pouring in. So first question
Yeah.
like
we
BARC.
can go on for around 15-20 minutes more, not an issue.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much. So I'm combining these 3 questions into one. My first question is, like people, scientists and technicians and engineers who work at BARC, place like BARC, or for example, that Kaiga, do they need to take special precautions on day-to-day basis, number one, to, to safeguard from the radiation?
Secondly, your experience with the Pokhran 2 blast, 1998. There's little story behind it, how it happened and all that. I think you were the director of BARC then, and your
Yeah.
experience with Homi Jahangir Bhabha and Raja Ramanna, late Dr. Raja Ramanna. So
Yeah.
3 into 1. So many people have asked this question, so I thought instead of calling them, I just put these 3 questions to you straight.
Okay.
There are questions still pouring in. Yes, sir.
Well, see, going to BRC every day is just like going to any laboratory or any other
Oh.
office. So
Mhm.
there is no difference whatsoever. There are, of course, many offices, they have a security at the gate. So BRC also has a security at the gate, and there is a security protocol. So this is true for most of the people who go to BRC. Then there are some facilities in BRC, for example, nuclear reactors or reprocessing plants or isotope processing plants, where we are actually working with radiation in close proximity. So there you have to take additional precaution and protection measures. So most of this work is carried out behind shielding. So that protects most of the radiation. But then there is also a possibility of, particularly isotope work, where you do chemical processes and all. And so there is a possibility of little contamination. So then you put on, just like, the COVID hospital, you find the PPE, personal protection equipment.
Terrible,
So
sir. How do you work with it?
even if you want to go to that ward, everybody has to put that on. So similarly, if you want to go to such facilities, there are different levels of personal protection equipment, but you kind of go to such facilities only after making use of such PPEs, and there are different types. And what images you see in the COVID quarantine ward, and there also you see many things. No, there are some people who are completely in they're fully inside a suit, where then there are others which are kind of suit, but then on the face they have just put a mask. Sometimes they have put a kind of a transparent shield. So there are some people put gloves, sometimes they don't. So that depending on the need, there are variety of personal protection equipments which we all put. But that is only those who go to such facilities or where there are such operations. But if you now carry out a survey that, well, there are people who have worked with radiation throughout their life, what has happened to them? So we have data to prove that their health status is just like the same anybody else. There is no difference because we are working at a threshold much below, and as I told you, at low levels of radiation, there is no harm.
Yeah.
So that was the first question.
Yeah.
The second question was
Pokhran 2 experience. 1 and 2 you can combine into one. Or I think we are more interested in Pokhran 2. Dr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee's time when you were the director of BARC.
Yeah. Now, see, the question is, as I told you, the nuclear device is quite different than a nuclear power reactor. And at the same time, you want to carry out the test, then you can't do test in open because there is a lot of radiation fallout and you have to contain it. So you have to carry out underground. And so it had to be done in a range. Pokhran, there is a lot of area, so there is no population around. You have the deep shafts, and so you have to kind of make this device parts, take the site, assemble them, take them below the shaft, carry out further assembly there, carry out instrumentation, signaling, which is kept several kilometers away, and then you have to stem that shaft because nothing should come out. and then you carry out. So all that preparation had to be done, and of course, the Defense Research and Development Organization was our partner, and so they did the conventional part, and all the nuclear part was done at BARC. So, and then of course, at the sort of scheduled time, this was the trigger was pressed and the test was carried out. Now, see, all these things have to be done in great secrecy. Normally, you have a project schedule and you say we have done 20%, 40%, 80%, 100%. Here, you cannot let out such information because you know it will have a lot of
True.
political and strategic fallout. So everything has to be done with high secrecy, and you want to maintain secrecy, you can't be having too many people. So with limited number of people, everybody has to do everything. So it was a great experience, and it sort of succeeded in kind of achieving all the objectives. Your third question was about Dr.
Experience with
Bhabha and
Dr. Raja
Ramanna.
Ramanna and with Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha.
Well, Dr. Bhabha was, I joined BARC after completing training school in 1964 August.
Oh.
And Bhabha, he unfortunately expired in 1966. So there was only this 1.5 years window. But I did have occasion to meet him. First was he came to our training school. You know, training school, we used to live in a guest house at Bandra. And so all the senior people would come to our guest house, particularly in the evening, and be with us for a dinner. And so he also had come to Bandra a couple of times for this dinner. And so I remember some discussions we together had with him on such occasions. And he was very clear in his mind. He was, he used to say that, well, you know, when we said, you know, what will we do after our training? So he says, no, you have to carry out research and don't worry about, you know, you will get everything that is required for your research, but you must kind of do good research. And if you do good research for me, I will be a satisfied person. So he was quite open about what was his expectation. At the same time, as you know, he had a very sharply defined program, the 3-stage nuclear power program. So he had a mission mode, he had a mission to complete, but with a fairly large degree of freedom to all his colleagues. And I think that was a very important feature. Later on, I met him in our graduation function of training school. Well, simply because I was the top ranker in the training school, so I received an award from him. And also, well, I had a lot of occasion to be, you know, very close to him during that day. Afterwards, I had only a couple of occasions to be in the same meeting, which was chaired by him. But that is all my association with Dr. Bhabha. With Dr. Ramanna, of course, Dr. Ramanna has been my mentor. So
I see.
He has been, of course, he was very senior, but for some reason we were quite close, and he has been guiding me in several things, both program related and also in terms of general management and how we should carry out our programs forward and things like that.
I heard he had a flavor for music also, right? And he had a PhD in music as well, something like that.
Well, I
Classic.
don't know about PhD in music, but he was an accomplished pianist.
I see.
And he used to give, I have myself witnessed several stage performances given by Dr. Ramana, the
Oh,
piano recitals.
I see.
And mind you, Dr. Bhabha also was a great connoisseur of music.
I see.
And in fact, one of the reasons why International Atomic Energy Agency is located in Vienna
Huh?
is attributed to Dr. Bhabha's love for music. He was
Oh,
the
I
chairman
see.
of the committee which selected where the IAE should be located,
Hmm.
and there was kind of equal division of opinion in the committee.
Hmm.
So Bhabha,
I
as the chairman, he said, now that opinion is equally divided, there's a division between Vienna and Geneva, and there is. So he said, yes, I will give my casting vote in favor
For
of
Vienna.
Vienna because I love music,
Correct.
and that. So he was he was also a great painter. There are several sketches made by him.
I
So
see.
these people were, of course, great scientists, but also great artists in their own rights.
Fantastic, sir. Fantastic. Very well answered. So there are a lot of questions. So I think the next question will be asked by Neha Naik. Neha Naik, can you come on screen? Neha Naik.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes,
please
sir.
come and ask your question.
Yeah.
Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Sir,
Ask
you
question,
have been,
Neha.
sir, you have been working for the ITER. So
Yes.
it had a collaboration of many countries that included China. So now,
Yes.
like there's a conflict between China and all other countries. So what's going to be the future?
Well, that's an issue not just in the context of ITER, but also in many other fields. And we should divide this in two parts. One is what we would do with China in the bilateral context, India-China relations, both the political relations as well as the business relations. And then secondly, there are several international platforms in which obviously China is a part. And so I think things will go according to whatever is the decision of that international body, the concerned international body. And I think as far as this international platform is concerned, we should see what is the global consensus and follow that. So I think we should not should get too much perturbed about ITER, because ITER is an international collaboration where there are I think 7 partners. China is there, Japan is there, Korea is there, Russia is there, then India is there, European Union is there, United States is there. So like that, and of course European Union as an entity. So I think time only will tell, and these issues I am sure will be discussed, but can't prejudge what will happen.
Okay, sir. So can we have Parth Naik? He has a very interesting question. Parth Naik. Parth, come on screen, please.
Yes.
Quickly. Yeah.
Sir, so my question is,
Your question.
how is the nuclear waste disposed without harming the environment?
Very good. This will require a little longish answer. See, what is nuclear waste? Nuclear waste is, after all, I told you about fission. So when an atom splits, you get 2 parts, which are called fission products. They get fragmented, 2 fission fragments, which are actually fission products. And there is a range of fission products. The entire periodic table is covered in these different fission products. and many of them are radioactive, obviously. And so they once you take out the spent fuel from the reactor, then these fission products, if there is no other use, then they have become waste. Now, in a nuclear fuel, when the you run the reactor with nuclear fuel, when the life for the fuel is over, you take that fuel out. Now, many countries, they use this fuel in a single use mode, once through mode. So if you have used some X tons of fuel, then after use, you get X tons of spent fuel, used fuel, which if there is no other use becomes a waste. Now, many countries, including United States, they do not recycle this. So for them, this X tons of spent fuel is a waste. Now, we in India and also some other countries like France, Russia, we believe in closed fuel cycle, recycle. So this X tons of fuel, we will kind of process and recover all valuable materials. So for example, the large part of that material, almost 95%, would be uranium. So we'll recover all that. There will be some plutonium, uranium converted to the next fissile material. So we'll recover all that. Then there will be some fission products which are useful. For example, cesium. For example, strontium. So today we recover those also. And so when you recover uranium and plutonium, we make fuel out of it and put it back in the nuclear reactor and get more energy. When we recover cesium, we convert them into a radiation source. And we can use that radiation source for several purposes. For example, this safety of blood. One of the ways of, otherwise, because, blood transfusion and all, you're always worried that do we get kind of contaminated blood and does it create any health hazard for us? But you could hygienize that blood using radiation. And one way of doing that is to use radiation source made out of cesium. So we make radiation source out of cesium and hygienize that blood. And there are facilities of that kind. You could also have other what are called Manner actinides. Uranium becomes plutonium, but plutonium can also become higher isotopes. So there could be americium, there could be neptunium. So we now have technology to recover even these material and recycle for beneficial purposes.
Okay.
The short point I'm making is, out of the X tons of uranium which we use in nuclear reactor, almost 99% or 99.5 or 99.8% material, today we have the capability to recycle.
Oh,
So what
it's very
remains
nice.
is what
Very
remains
small.
is the small portion, and that we immobilize in glass.
Yeah.
And if you immobilize in glass, then anything coming in contact will not see the contamination, it remains. So we have facilities to immobilize this radioactive waste, and that we put inside, encapsulate that in a canister, and that canister we encapsulate that into another canister. And then if I have a small stadium kind of hall, within that hall, I can keep all waste for all time to come. And after that, it will decay out, So the problem of waste which we hear in literature is because people don't recycle. For us, this problem is minimal because we recycle. And the sustainability and kind of clean environment, one of the mantra is recycle. So it applies to nuclear also.
Very nice. Yeah. Sir, your presentation has generated so much interest. Initially, I had only 5 questions. Now the questions have gone past 40. So what I'm going to do is, I will just take another 2-3 questions maximum. So can Pradneya Prabhu Desai ask his next question? Pradneya Prabhu Desai, the next question. Quick,
Yes, sir.
Pradneya, come quickly.
Hello, sir.
Hello,
Yeah, you
where are
go
you?
ahead.
I'm not able to see you.
Sir, I think
Go,
video has some problem. Video has a
go
problem.
ahead.
He will speak. He will speak. Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Sir, I wanted to ask you a question. Sir,
Yeah.
as we all know, nuclear fusion causes radiations and also some wastes which are well disposed. But the cost of creating a nuclear power plant is also very high. So how can we create many nuclear plants in India and make India a good nuclear energy source?
Well, that is not true. You know, we have been manufacturing nuclear power plants ourselves within the country, and we have been generating electricity and selling it in the market. Now, I must tell you that in nuclear power operation in India, there are no subsidies. Every cost, what we talked about waste management, so waste management costs, people talk about decommissioning of a power plant, so decommissioning costs, and also, of course, the operation, maintenance, construction, every cost is accounted for, and we recover that as a part of tariff. And the tariff of nuclear power plant is competitive compared to alternative energy generation sources. And the nuclear power corporation, it is all this work is being done by a company, and that company is a cash rich company. Its CRISIL rating, you know, commercial entities are rated by different rating companies. So it has a CRISIL rating of AAA for I think, I don't know how many years, maybe 10 years or longer. So it is a high performing company, and you don't get rating unless your profitability is high. And you don't get profitability high unless you are able to pay for capital cost and operation cost both. So, see, it is true that capital cost of a nuclear power plant is higher than coal power plant, but the running cost of nuclear power plant is much lower. And everything is paid for, including cost of capital is paid for. So that perception that cost of nuclear is high is actually not true.
Okay. Sir, the questions are just rolling by. I just caught one question. So he says, why was Pokhran 1 called Smiling Buddha? There was any specific reason for this? I was just wondering why.
See, Pokhran 1 was a peaceful nuclear experiment. And it was peaceful because at that time, you know, 1974, you know, we were all talking about peaceful applications of atomic energy.
True.
You know, peaceful applications of atomic energy are in terms of generation of electricity, in terms of agriculture, in terms of medical, you know, treatment of cancer and whatnot.
Yes.
In terms of industry. So like that, there are peaceful applications of atomic energy also in terms of nuclear explosions. For example, you can, you know, for construction, you require explosives. We use dynamite. Now, when you have to do large construction, then you can use nuclear explosives and you can do things much cheaper. And the question was, a lot of development work was being done in those days to develop this application.
True.
Now, so the 1974 experiment was a peaceful nuclear experiment. And of course, we were quite aware of the way world would take it. But the fact is, IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, was running peaceful nuclear explosion programs. There were conferences. So India said that, okay, let us carry out a peaceful nuclear explosion. And when you do peaceful, I think smiling Buddha is a perfect symbol
Okay.
for peaceful nuclear explosion.
Got it, sir. Got it, sir. Looks like you'll have to come for one more session after 2 months down the line. Can we have one final question, sir? One final question. So can
Okay,
Aditya
last
Upasane,
one.
Aditya, last question. Aditya Upasane,
Last.
can you ask your question?
So
Come
my
on, sir.
question is, what difference did the incident of Chernobyl have on the designs of the nuclear reactors?
Oh,
Huh.
very good.
The last
See,
question. Let's wind up.
nuclear reactor designs are of there is a great variety of nuclear reactor designs. Chernobyl was an RBMK kind of reactor. Now, RBMK is a Russian acronym, so don't worry about that expansion. But basically, it's a graphite pile in which you have these channels which contain the fuel, and they are cooled by water. So it is a water-cooled uranium-fueled but graphite-moderated reactor. This graphite of these reactors runs at extremely high temperatures. In fact, the water that flows around the fuel, which cools the fuel, also cools the graphite. Now, that kind of reactor, RBMK reactors, were built in Russia and no other country. Now, Russia also, in addition to RBMK, they are building other kind of reactors, VVER reactors. Our Kudankulam is of VVER variety, which is different from RBMK. And VVER reactors are like PWRs, pressurized water reactors, which are there in large numbers across the world. Now, other countries have built reactors like PWR, as I told you, which is the most popular reactor in the world. There are boiling water reactors, Tarapur 1 and 2, they were boiling water reactors set up in collaboration with General Electric in those times. Our reactor program is based on heavy water reactor, pressurized heavy water reactor, which is a tube type reactor, but the moderator is heavy water, and that moderator runs at almost room temperature. It's very cold. Now that has important safety significance, because if you have kind of cold water, not cold, but not very hot, it's warm water sort of thing, sitting right inside the core, then it provides a lot of safety against an accidental core heat up. There are other safety features in our reactors. So the short point I'm making is, first of all, the RBMK reactor, which was also there in Chernobyl and which met with that accident, they are not the reactors constructed anywhere else in the world. So that is one. And secondly, now that doesn't mean that we said we studied RBMK and say, oh, they have RBMK, ours is PHWR, so it doesn't apply to us, nothing will happen here. No, not like that. We have analyzed that accident, Chernobyl accident, we have analyzed. In fact, and all over the world, people have analyzed and understood the root causes. You know, the accident has happened in a sequence which is relevant to that design, but there are always root causes. You know, failure take place, whether the crack propagated, whether the coolant failed, whether some active equipment failed. You know, you can go down to that level and look at the root causes. And those root causes, now we said that supposing those root causes also kind of appear in our reactors, then what will happen? And that has been a major design exercise, and through that a lot of modifications wherever necessary were carried out. And so that is how I said that the reactors today are much safer. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Very well. Very well.
Yeah.
So in fact, I don't know, we have no option but to stop. But sir, you're motivated our students like anything. You've taken them to totally different level. They're further motivated now thanks to you. In fact, you have been the role models of all the students in the country, along with Dr. Raghunath Mashelkar, and more so for Goa because you are the son of the soil. So thank you so much, sir. We will
Thank
make
you.
a report on your interactive session, and I will also send you a copy. Thank you very much, sir. And you have been so humble. I have just no word. That's why you are the role model here of all the students. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. God
Thank
bless.
you, and all the best to all of you. God bless.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Evan Katkar.
Yeah.
मातशें बेगीन यो तूं म्हाका मेळना कशें हाजें मातशें यो हांगा मातशें बेगीन यो कित्याक म्हाका ब्रेक मेळचो ना मागीर म्हाका जमना ते ट्रॅकिंगाक.
So when is the next lecture?
Next lecture will be after 15 minutes. After 15 minutes. बेगीन मातसो यो रे हांगा मारप. Okay, stop video.